Fujifilm announced another firmware update coming to the X-H2S, the X-H2, and the GFX 100 Mark II, which will include autofocus improvements to improve subject tracking stability in autofocus continuous in video mode. F-Log 2C, which is an expanded color space with a much larger gamut than previous F-Log and F-Log 2, which is essentially just BT 2020 color space, I think. And lastly, timecode sync with wired connection utilizing ambient locket, which I think is just a specific company that makes a certain type of timecode generator. I don't know why it's specific to that company, but that's what they said in the video. They mentioned there could be more included with this firmware, but these are the only 3 items that they've confirmed so far. The firmware is supposedly going to be ready in November, not an exact date, but next month. Fujifilm also acknowledged that these cameras, these 3 cameras in particular, are being used in professional video settings. So 2 of those are pretty solid firmware updates that we sort of know what they mean. I mean, the improvement to F-Log 2 with a much larger color space than is currently available in F-Log and F-Log 2. The addition of a wired connection to jam timecode into these cameras using this particular device. But what does, autofocus improvements, in particular subject tracking stability and autofocus continuous for video, like what does that mean? Subject tracking stability. Obviously, they're acknowledging that there is a problem, but they haven't really specified what the problem is and what they're going to do to address it. So in the summary, subject tracking while video filming and face eye detection while video filming. So those are the 2 areas that they have identified as needing improvement, but what actual improvements are they going to implement? I think we can all agree that the eye detection is not sticky enough, and it also gives a lot of false positives, both in photography and in video. So you can see a green tracking box in video, and that indicates that it's in focus on the eye. But of course, when you look at your video, it's not the case. And same in photography. The main thing is like false positives in both photography and video. And when it's tracking in video in particular, that's actually sticking on and keeping up. Because that's the other thing. It's just not, it's not fast enough, and it's not able to really keep up with subjects that are moving in and out, or when the camera is moving closer or further away from the subject. The other thing for me that I've noticed a lot is it doesn't really stick to an eye potentially if you bring something in front of the camera. It is way too eager to move to something that gets in front of the eye, even if it's not completely blocking. So that'd be another thing. And I don't know that, I don't think I've ever had firsthand experience with a camera that if you do block the initial subject with something, it's going to move to that thing eventually, or it's going to move somewhere. But the really good autofocusing systems like Sony in particular don't immediately move to something that blocks the initial subject. There will be a waiting period essentially before it does move, and I think that's another huge improvement that they could make. The other big problem for me is the confirmation hunting. It seems like Fujifilm is really still relying a lot on contrast-based autofocus, which isn't atypical. Most of these phase detect systems are hybrid systems. They use phase detect and contrast detect in conjunction. But it seems like Fujifilm is relying on that contrast detect to confirm, to lock on to focus. And you can see that as it's shifting back and forth before it really decides, hey, I'm going to focus on this thing. That's fine for photography because you can't see that. As long as the final image is sharp, then it doesn't really matter if it did that hunting. But in video, that's really a no-go. Why is Fujifilm focusing on video improvements to these cameras, in particular video autofocus? And I don't really know. I can only speculate. Maybe they're focusing on these 3 cameras to sort of keep the firmware update contained. So if there is any problem or it doesn't work as intended, it's not going to be rolled out to all of the cameras. There is a pinned comment on Fujifilm's video of this announcement that indicates that video autofocus improvements are going to come to other cameras by the end of the year. He mentions that they have received requests for improvements to these aspects from users. And it seems to me that if you improve the continuous autofocus for video, that it would simultaneously improve the continuous autofocus for photography. And the other reason I think is maybe they've received more complaints based on continuous autofocus for video than they have for photography. I have seen a couple of different channels, I'm not going to name names or throw shade on anybody, who have been a little bit, I don't know, wishy-washy when it comes to criticizing Fujifilm for the autofocus, because in their use cases, they haven't really experienced problems with the autofocus for photography. I've also seen that sentiment echoed a lot in comments on various videos where a lot of people will say, hey, in photography, in my use case, my settings, I've been able to get it to work fine. So maybe that's Fujifilm's thinking, because there's really no getting around the fact that for video, it doesn't work very well, and it's way behind the competition, to put it lightly. Of course, people have been upset with the lack of communication on Fujifilm's part. There's been, this whole year, for the most part, people have been complaining, rightfully so, about the autofocus performance, and they haven't really heard from Fuji. So this is really the first sort of firsthand acknowledgement that from Fuji's part that there is a problem and that they're working on it. But there's really not a lot of detail about what the problem is, what they think the problem is, and how they're actually going to address it. So of course, we just got to wait and see. On the other hand, Fujifilm has released a ton of firmware updates throughout the year. So clearly they are working on it, but they're kind of doing it on their own terms, behind the wall, and not really communicating what they're doing, what they think problems are, and how they're addressing them. I don't know how they're going to number the firmware, but the X-H2S is already on version 7. And that speaks to two things. Number one, if you're pessimistic, could indicate that the camera wasn't ready to be released. They have been scrambling to get it to the point that people think it should have been upon release. So that's the pessimistic way to look at it. And the optimistic way to look at it would be that they are continuously giving you free updates and free improvements to a camera that you already purchased. Sony had received a lot of criticism over the last year, 2 years, that some of its high-end cameras, the A7S III, the Alpha 1, were not getting new features when cameras that were much cheaper, lower on the product stack, were being released with features that those two higher-end cameras didn't have. Sony finally started to include some of those features in firmware for those two cameras, but then they have come under fire for releasing firmware that has been unstable, to say the least. People have been complaining that they are bricking their cameras. Again, going back to that pessimistic point of view, there's no guarantee that these firmwares are going to be stable, and you're sort of treating your customer base as sort of like beta testers in a way. I am optimistic that Fujifilm can make improvements, but I'm a little bit doubtful that they are going to get to parity with the other manufacturers, at least on this generation of products. But I guess we'll find out.